This is Jeff Kober, and we welcome you to Disney Insights. We are on the eve of the 250th anniversary of our nation, and I wanted to provide some posts that would really celebrate all that is celebrated in the Disney parks about America. The Hall of Presidents is something that goes back decades, nearly as early as Disneyland itself. We look at its original incarnations, from Liberty Street to great moments with Mr. Lincoln to ultimately the Hall of Presidents itself. So I know you take a nap there, but save that nap for Mickey's PhilharMagic. There is so much to learn and so much to cherish from these attractions. We'll look at its history, the details, and the insights that will truly help you to appreciate not only these shows that originated by Walt Disney himself, but better appreciate our own citizenship in this free country. Join us as we visit Liberty Street, great moments with Mr. Lincoln, and the Hall of Presidents. The Hall of Presidents is an idea that is almost as old as Disneyland itself. It goes back nearly 70 years. One of the projects and additions Walt considered after opening Disneyland was the idea of a Liberty Street. He even put a banner up in Town Square declaring a grand opening for 1959. Well, he ended up building the monorail submarine voyage and the Matterhorn bobsled instead. But he saw the potential of such a place that was largely framed around the Disney film Johnny Tremaine, which came out in 1957. Liberty Street would have buildings based on the architecture of each of the 13 colonies, but it especially would have all the elements of the film, the Old North Church, the Liberty Tree, the dock for dumping tea, and most importantly, a presentation inside a Liberty Hall that would present a series of tableaus and presentations that would spotlight historic moments in American history. And all of this would end with One Nation Under God, where life-size costume figures of the U.S. presidents would appear. Not only would numerous layouts and images showcase what this new edition would be about, Walt was so serious about it that he had the entire thing rendered in model form and then carefully inserted into a photo so it looked like it was already in place. Yet nothing like that happened. Yet. And a big reason why was that while Walt had been using mechanical animals and various attractions like the Jungle Cruise, he had not come anywhere close to the idea of physical beings brought to life through audio animatronics. It would be the advent of the New York World's Fair in 1964 before a life-size figure of a U.S. president could realistically be depicted speaking to an audience. Seeing all the possibilities of corporate sponsors funding the technology of a sophisticated attraction, Disney pitched the attraction, One Nation Under God, to corporate sponsors like Coca-Cola, Hallmark, and Union Carbide in the RCA Victor Theater in New York. And this was 1961, before I was even born. And the show not only included a theatrical history shown on a huge 5-panel screen, but the presentation of all of the U.S. presidents. While many attending were impressed, they found the cost too prohibitive and not necessarily aligned to its brand messaging. Walt walked away realizing that to sell this, he had to have an actual audio animatronic president. He commissioned Imagineer Blaine Gibson to sculpt Lincoln, while other WED employees, such as Roger Brokey, Wethel Rogers, and Bob Gurr, were assigned to figure out the mechanics and the technology. Then, in spring of 1962, while visiting progress on the General Electric and Ford projects, a man named Robert Moses came to Walt Disney Productions. Robert Moses, a legendary force to be reckoned with in New York City, had early beginnings when he played a role in developing the 1939 New York World's Fair. Some 25 years later, he led the city to creating the 1964-65 New York World's Fair. In an initial visit in 1960, Moses met with Walt and suggested a sort of children's village for the fair. Walt wasn't keen on that idea. Furthermore, he had already met with executives at GE, IBM, AT&T, and General Dynamics. Walt had a bigger set of ideas in mind, ideas aligned with urban planning and animatronics. During this time, Ford and General Electric signed up for the fair. But when Robert Moses saw a preview of Walt's version of Abraham Lincoln in 1962, he was committed to do whatever was necessary to get Lincoln to the fair. In fact, he would say that the fair would not open up if it did not have Lincoln. Walt recalled inviting Robert Moses to meet Mr. Lincoln. Quote, "Moses gave me a funny look," Walt remembered. "I said, 'Come on in and meet him.' So when we walked in the door, I said, 'Mr. Lincoln, meet Mr. Moses.' And Lincoln stood up and put his hand out, and Moses went over and shook hands with him. Well, Moses is quite a showman, and he said, 'I've got to have Lincoln at the fair.' But I said, this is 5 years away anyway. Yet Moses wouldn't take no for an answer. Before I knew it, I had my arm twisted, and I said yes. We now had to get Mr. Lincoln on the road, I think in about 13 months, end of quote. Robert Moses thought Lincoln should go into the U.S. Federal Pavilion, an idea that Walt liked. But Under Secretary of Commerce Franklin Roosevelt Jr. didn't buy in. They were not interested. It was Moses who eventually convinced the state of Illinois to host a pavilion entitled the Land of Lincoln. But that convincing perhaps came because Moses secretly assured to the legislature that the fair would quietly subsidize some $250,000 for the pavilion, something no other pavilion ever received. The announcement of great moments with Mr. Lincoln was made in Springfield, Illinois, on the centennial observance of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, with Illinois Governor Otto Kerner making the announcement. While the 3 other exhibits opened on time at the New York World's Fair, to include It's a Small World, started a year earlier, Lincoln was late to the party as its technology continued to plague Walt and his ability to open the show in time. According to Randy Bright's Disneyland Inside Story, WED Imagineer Wethel Rogers noted that Lincoln's 500 pounds of hydraulic pressure smashed the chair to splinters. Quote, "It seems that no matter every show we open," he says, "we always have technical problems." On the night of the premiere, Disney had to tell the governors of both the state of Illinois and New York that the show was still malfunctioning. He promised it would be ready in 1 week. And when it was finally previewed, it went well. So well that there was a round of applause. Then, as Lincoln went back to sit back down, some malfunction occurred, and he then stood up as if to take a bow. At that point, the place came apart. People cheering and clapping and going crazy. In the end, Moses was so satisfied that he thought that the 2 best parts he brought to the fair was Michelangelo's actual La Pieta from the Vatican and Walt Disney's Abraham Lincoln in audio animatronic form. At the end of it all, Walt got out of the deal was monies to create audio animatronic figures and the right to bring that show right back to Disneyland after the fair. The following summer, in July of 1965, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln opened at the Opera House in Town Square on Main Street, USA, at Disneyland. Personally, I remember the experience well as a child. I believe it was the summer of 1967 that we came to Disneyland. I remember riding It's a Small World, which had opened in 1966, and also Pirates of the Caribbean, which had opened in 67. So it was probably 67 that I first saw this. By then, there had been several Sunday night programs on Disney's Wonderful World of Color. Entering the Opera House, you came into a foyer, which then brought you into what is now the inner lobby of the attraction. It was actually a pre-show theater back then, and guardrails weaved you in a very strange pattern that would take guests from the foyer and ultimately divide them up to go through the doors into the final theater where we would see Lincoln. The first show outlined his life through a series of visuals. He stood for that portion before going into the theater. When I entered the theater and saw the show, I knew even as a 6-year-old that Lincoln wasn't real. I mean, my brothers kept telling me that. And they may have even been one of those people who threw pennies onto the stage to see if Lincoln would actually flinch. At least I wouldn't have put it past them. But I thought the whole thing was amazing. And the Battle Hymn of the Republic at the end, I thought what had been done by the Tabernacle Choir. It wasn't, but it sounded that good. And to see how the clouds formed the U.S. flag behind the Capitol building was the cherry on top. I have since seen it scores of times over the decades. Some forms better than others. At one point, it was removed in 1973 when the Walt Disney story was added to the Opera House. But criticism came far and wide that Disney was more important and had replaced Lincoln, making him more, it just didn't settle well. Soon it was retitled The Walt Disney Story, featuring great moments with Mr. Lincoln. That show was sponsored by Gulf Oil, and the Walt Disney Story made its way to the Magic Kingdom out at Walt Disney World as well. But the plan for Mr. Lincoln and Company in Florida was much greater. It was always known that the blessing of size at Walt Disney World would mean a larger park. This offered Disney an opportunity to return to an earlier concept. Though the original project was called Liberty Street, in truth, that design at Disneyland was kind of a corner cul-de-sac. But never mind, it never got built. But what did get created was Liberty Square in the Magic Kingdom when it opened in 1971. Included would be this Constitutional Hall or Liberty Hall, went through different names of sorts, that would present the Hall of Presidents. This time with all of the presidents from George Washington to Richard M. Nixon. This building would recall the federal-style civic buildings of Philadelphia and would have the number 1787 on top, acknowledging the year the Constitution was crafted. While Walt Disney passed long before designs were finalized for Liberty Square and the Hall of Presidents, Roy O. Disney, his brother, felt keenly that this would need to be a signature part of what would become Walt Disney World. He himself championed this project. I've chronicled what Liberty Square was like in other podcasts when it opened, but here's some details that many actually miss. The original bridge that leads you from Central Plaza into Liberty Square was actually kind of bowed, and was named after the bridge in Concord. In time, that bridge was flattened to better accommodate the parades that came through. With New Orleans being so close to Florida, it was kind of determined that Liberty Square would be a better alternative than New Orleans Square. And like New Orleans Square at Disneyland, it was designed with several intricate back alleys and small shops. However, as construction furthered, several pieces of the original Liberty Square actually never made it to fruition. Sleepy Hollows takes architectural cues from Sunnyside, the home of the author of the legend of Sleepy Hollow, Washington Irving. The Columbia Harbor House was named after the Columbia Rediva, the first American ship to sail around the world. Disneyland has a Columbia ship replica, and it would have been used in the rivers of America at Walt Disney World, which really makes more sense than a steamship from the 1830s or beyond. But the tallest mast of the ship would not have been able to clear the monorail beam in the Seven Seas Lagoon in order to go off to the dry dock back in Bay Lake. Speaking of the Columbia, that's how we got the Columbia Harbor House, the main counter service eatery in this land. The innkeeper, according to the story of the Harbor House, is Priscilla Lapham, the romantic counterpart to Johnny Tremaine in the book by Esther Forbes. Also, the proprietor of this house, Harold Stallmaster, is actually the individual who played Johnny Tremaine in the Disney version. Everyone talks about the rock work of the sewer running kind of down the center of the street, similar to how sewage would course through any community during that time. With this, they note that there are no restrooms in Liberty Square, but in reality, there is a second floor restroom, the Liberty Tavern, and the ones next to Diamond Horseshoe are just as much part of Liberty Square as they are Ventureland or Frontierland. The original Liberty tree in the center of the square was discovered some 8 miles away from the Magic Kingdom and was hoisted and moved, root ball and all, by a 100-ton crane moving very, very slowly. And of course, there's also the Haunted Mansion at Liberty Square, but that's a bigger story for another day. Still, the mansion actually appears in a different land for every park. New Orleans for Disneyland, Liberty Square for Magic Kingdom, Fantasyland for Tokyo Disneyland, and Frontierland for Disneyland Paris. The very cool thing about Liberty Square is that its idea was generated back in the 1950s for Disneyland, and its result is much more than just some corner of the park. I was married and expecting my second child when I first visited the Magic Kingdom and subsequently Liberty Square and the Hall of Presidents. This was in 1988. But I knew this show forwards and backwards from my youth. Disneyland Records sold vinyl albums of various attractions, and I came upon the Hall of Presidents album at Smitty's grocery store in Phoenix, Arizona. I still have the album today. I play it over and over again, and I memorized all of the presidents up until its release, which was again Richard M. Nixon. I also did a fairly good job of memorizing Lincoln's oration. Like Great Moments of Mr. Lincoln, the 16th president was the only orator originally in the Hall of Presidents. Now you hear the Gettysburg Address, but Disney legend James Alger created originally an amalgamation based on Lincoln's first inaugural address, the Cooper Union Address, the Temperance Address, and the Lyceum Address, among others. Royal Dano did the original recording. Step into the lobby of the Hall of Presidents. You have stepped into a museum depicting artifacts associated with the first presidents and first ladies over the years on display. The key to Disneyland, given honorarily to Vice President Richard Nixon on his first visit to Disneyland. Apparently, he put it to good use, as is noted that he was the president who visited Disneyland more than any other president. In the center of all of this is the Great Seal of the United States, woven into a custom floor carpet and surrounded by a railing. Because federal laws strictly limit where the seal can be displayed, Disney had to receive approval through an official act of Congress. Make no mistake, this is a real museum created and ran by archivists and researchers. There are actually several museums around Walt Disney World, mostly at Epcot, but this is a legitimate and secured museum collection here at the Magic Kingdom. The focus of the Hall of Presidents is just that, the U.S. presidents. Here's some insights about the actual presidents as they are presented in audio animatronic form. Originally, there were 36 presidents in 1971 in the original presentation. Nixon was 37th, but Grover Cleveland served 2 non-consecutive terms like Trump. Today, there are 45 presidents on the stage. Imagineer Blaine Gibson sculpted all of the presidents up until George W. Bush in 2001. Originally, the busts were sent to Guatemala, where wig makers created authentic hairpieces. Every day, the hairpieces are checked daily before park opening by cosmetologists who come in around 4 a.m. each day to check out all the park figures. George Washington's chair in the presentation is an exact reproduction of the one he sat in during the 1787 Constitutional Convention. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was given a Phi Beta Kappa key to wear on his jacket. Because of his life experience with polio, he is depicted here in the show as seated. The figure of George W. Bush was given a duplicate of his inscribed Timex Indiglo watch. I think I said that right. For many years, also, Bob Phelps was tailor to the U.S. presidents, overseeing the maintenance and tailoring of this entire wardrobe. He had worked on several Hollywood projects, including The Sound of Music, before joining Disney. He has a window above Main Street. Beyond these details were technological ones. By the time Walt Disney World had opened in 1971, advances had been made to audio animatronics, moving beyond the cams and mechanical devices used to make tiki birds, haunted ghosts, and singing dolls move. The Magic Kingdom would now have figures that were programmed and driven by computers. With this, a new digital animation control system was established. It was called DAX. And all of this was centrally located underneath in the utilidor between Peter Pan, the Mickey Mouse Revue, and the Hall of Presidents. I've been there many times, and it was one of the most revolutionary Epcot-style things to have been created at Magic Kingdom, even more than building the utilidor itself. Centrally directing all of the electronics throughout the park, this was a big deal. In addition to having been in the control room at DAX, I have been on stage with the Hall of Presidents. In creating content and programs for the Disney Institute, I took the time to look at how we might experience this, a sort of backstage tour of this attraction. Tied to themes around leadership or delivering a great experience, it just seemed like a possibility to explore. What I found when I stepped into the wings of the theater is that the stage is incredibly small. Yes, it looks wide to the audience, and it is, but it holds very little depth. The presidents are positioned on a rising red carpeted platform, but the space from one platform to another is very narrow. It's a little tricky weaving your way between presidents, especially since so many more have been added since the park opening in 1971. But what also caught my attention as I saw the figures between shows is that hydraulics can relax at any given moment. And having a Calvin Coolidge suddenly twerk unexpectedly is kind of freaky. It's kind of like the toys in Toy Story. You know, they're not looking at you when you're in their presence. They're kind of just looking forward, off into the distance. All are frozen. That is, well, until Grover Cleveland suddenly moves an arm. I am always caught up by the emotion of the presentation, whether it's the Hall of Presidents or just great moments with Mr. Lincoln. But backstage, you witness another side of the show, one that impresses upon you the attention to detail, the amount of technology, and the serious machinery required to make this happen. Until 1993, there had always been the original film and then a roll call of all the presidents. Originally, Lincoln would then stand and speak for all of the nation's leaders. This would be followed by the Battle Hymn of the Republic. The show at the Hall of Presidents has evolved over the years. Of course, each new president was added into the original show. The original film was done by longtime film art director John DeCure Sr., who showcased some 85 paintings created uniquely for this film. Of iWorks, who began with Walt in the early Mickey days, developed a unique camera process that would showcase the paintings across the theater's 5-panel widescreen view. This would be the last project of iWorks did for Disney before passing away in 1971. In 1993, there were major changes in the wake of Bill Clinton being elected to office. The highlight of these changes was that Clinton became the first president to provide his voice to recite a speech for his resemblance in the show. Lincoln's remarks were changed, but Roy O'Donnell, the original voice chosen by Walt, and actually one who played Abraham Lincoln in an episode of the TV show The Rifleman, he was too ill to provide the narrative for the 16th president. Peter Renaday also known as the voice of Nemo in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Henry in the Country Bear Jamboree, became the voice. Moreover, the entire film was redone. We, the people, had many of the same images from the original film, but its narrator was now Maya Angelou, and its focus was more centered around the price of guaranteeing civil rights. That same film was kept later with President George W. Bush, but actor J.D. Hall replaced Angelou as the narrator. With President Obama, the attraction added George Washington as a third speaking president. That would be provided by David Morse, who played the role of Washington in HBO's series on John Adams, a film I highly recommend. Royal Dano's voice was put back in to the Abraham Lincoln section, and America the Beautiful became the song that closed out the program. Morgan Freeman was selected as the new narrator of the film, which incorporated much more artwork and photography outside of Disney's own catalog. As Morgan Freeman shared, in a time of emperors and kings, it was an outstanding revolutionary dream that we, the people, should choose our own leaders, that they should be one of us. Later in Donald Trump's first administration, a new film was created called The Idea of a President. Lincoln was called upon to give the Gettysburg Address right after the Civil War section in the film. Trump gave the oath of office and a short speech after being introduced by Washington. That would be the last time a speech was given. With Biden taking office, he provided his voice to give the oath of office, but he offered no speech thereafter. When Trump returned the second time, his speech was taken out, just leaving in the oath of office. With all these changes, the battle hymn of the Republic has long since been removed, but the highly political environment created another change when Trump first took office, and it's continued until today. Concerned that the Hall of Presidents presentation would become more of a political rally for whatever incumbent was currently the president, a scallop-designed edge was added across the front of the orchestra pit and along the sides of the extended stage, so as to subtly disinvite anyone who wanted to rush the stage for some selfie. Disney security was also brought in to attend many of these performances, but something much more subtle was added to the experience. In the foyer, a painting of Walt Disney and an image of Lincoln alongside it is now presented near the entrance to the theater. A small plaque offers a short description of how the attraction came to be through the original Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. Adjacent, across the way, is a sculpture of Walt Disney himself and a plaque that says, Walt Disney, an American original. There you see 3 photos, one of him dressed up with his childhood friend as Abraham Lincoln, one with Richard Nixon at the opening of the monorail at Disneyland, and one with Dwight D. Eisenhower being presented the Freedom's Foundation Award. With it comes a quotation from Walt, quote, "I've always been a kind of billboard American. I think I get that red, white, and blue streak up and down my back every once in a while." If you missed the subtle messages in the lobby, you'll receive additional insight from both the cast member as well as a host narrator after you've been ushered into the 700-seat auditorium. The cast member begins with a very specific introduction.
Thank you for joining us tonight for this reverent celebration of America's leaders, both past and present. Now, Walt Disney World Resort proudly presents the Hall of Presidents.
Then, a recorded host narrator shares the following.
This program is dedicated to the memory of Walt Disney. In 1971, his love for America inspired the creation of the Hall of Presidents, a place to celebrate the optimism and goodwill he saw at the heart of the American story. Walt's vision was to honor the nation by honoring the American presidency.
No ride, entertainment, attraction, or experience has used the word reverent to describe the importance of this attraction, at least the importance of this attraction to the man who created it. In its subtle way, it's inviting anyone and everyone who appreciates Walt Disney, the American original, to appreciate this original attraction. While it has evolved to some degree, its original intent merits the name Walt Disney on it, just like you would have with Walt Disney's Carousel of Progress or Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki. This is truly a creation not just from the mind of Walt Disney, but from his heart. There are many challenges our republic faces, many mistakes we've made before, and many challenges ahead. But the concept of a president, not a ruler or king or dictator, but one whom we would elect to preside over this country, is still a grand idea. And Walt Disney felt so keenly about it that he and his brother Roy committed decades of effort to making it a reality. With big and impressive attractions in the parks, it's easy to dismiss this one as antiquated or archaic. But I cannot imagine a Disneyland without great moments with Mr. Lincoln, nor a Walt Disney World without the Hall of Presidents. I add my own sentiment that this show still impresses me and should impress anyone, regardless of who is in office or what political party you may be affiliated with. It provides a message that is important to all Americans, no matter where they are coming from. Whether you visit the Hall of Presidents as part of the 250th anniversary of our country or sometime thereafter, take the time to really study, listen, and consider the messages shared from start to finish. Consider the possibility that cherishing the Hall of Presidents is an invitation to become a better, more aware citizen.